We're going to step back now and talk about the presidency with some who've actually served in administrations. What skills make a good president is what we're looking for here. If we know that, maybe we'll know what to look for in the candidates asking for the job. Tom Ridge is the former Republican governor of Pennsylvania and served as the first Homeland Security Secretary when it was formed after 9/11. William Cohen is a former Republican senator from Maine who served as defense secretary under Democrat Bill Clinton. He is now a consultant and sits on the CBS board of directors. Retired Air Force General Michael Hayden served as head of the NSA and the CIA and is now a principal with the Chertoff Group here in Washington. Rosa Brooks was a senior advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy earlier in the Obama administration, and she now has a book out, How Everything Became War and the Military Became Everything. And former Utah Republican Governor Mike Leavitt, who served as Secretary of Health and Human Services and head of the EPA. He joins us from Salt Lake City. Governor, I want to start with you. If we think of this campaign as a job interview, and you are all here to elect this, or I should say hire this new president, what are you going to look for? What should you look for?
A good metaphor to think about the White House and the job of the presidency would be an air traffic controller with 500 planes in the air at any given moment, all of which think they're about ready to run out of fuel or need to make an emergency landing. There's a lot happening, and there's a lot of voices, and you need a person who has the temperament, that's a word that's been used a lot today, but has the ability to operate in an orderly way, that has a history of making good decisions under fire, and that can deal with it in an atmosphere where there's going to be a lot of conflicting voices and people saying unpleasant things about him or her, and responds in an appropriate fashion.
Secretary Ridge, what are you looking for?
Well, in addition to everything that Michael said, I think someone who has the leadership qualities that combine respect from the body politic, Republicans and Democrats alike, someone who projects an empathy and a humanity. I remember what Jack Kemp used to say, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And we need somebody that kind of projects that image to Americans. And we need a president, frankly, we need a candidate who is the same person as a candidate and as a president. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a challenge with one of the candidates we have. And ultimately, we need someone that's decisive with good intuition, with really good intuition, who can distill. Mike mentioned all these challenges. It's the most complex 21st century. I don't think any president will have ever inherited a more complex world, whether it's the global economy, the scourge of terrorism, the digital forevermore. Mm-hmm. And we need somebody who's willing to listen to different points of view and be decisive once he or she decides to make that decision.
Secretary Cohen, what's your...
I would say he should have, or she should have, access to good information and exercise judgment wisely. So someone who thinks deeply about serious issues and who speaks clearly and uses language to educate, to inspire, and not to inflame. And I would say that a commander-in-chief, given all the complexities involved, you need to have a group of people who are also wise, seasoned, and will give you advice and not be simply yes men and women, but be willing to challenge you on crucial issues to say that you're wrong and need to change. So it requires a number of things, but I think having facts, information, knowledge, wisdom, and the ability to change your mind based upon the advice that you're getting from other people.
Rosa, from your perspective, what do you think that...
You know, in 2008, when I was comparing, as a Democrat, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and everyone said Clinton's experienced, Obama's inexperienced, I thought, oh, experience doesn't matter. We need fresh faces, we need fresh ideas. And I've sort of come to regret feeling that way after working inside the government for a while, that we have this great government which is sometimes badly broken, but it has these pockets of brilliance and wonderfulness in it. And if you don't understand all the levers that make that government work or not work, and how to get the best out of the people, many of whom are talented people, some of whom are not, who work in the federal government, it's really hard to get things done. And the same is true, I think, for the Hill. I think I've come to believe that experience in understanding the nitty-gritty aspects of what makes government work is really vital.
General, what's your contribution?
Well, first of all, let me second all the ideas that have been put out there. But I boil it down to my most critical conversations with the president, which have been about covert action. And in here, that temperament, honesty, integrity thing really matters, because when you're talking to the president about a covert, I mean, it's covert for a reason, because frankly, operationally, ethically, legally, the course ahead isn't all that clear. And so when I'm talking to a president about that, I'm representing all the men and women at the Central Intelligence Agency. I want to know that I'm talking to a decent human being. I want to know that I'm talking to someone who broadly reflects the values of the country that we want to defend.
All right, we'll come back and we'll talk about that decision-making moment in a second, but we've got to take a break and we'll be back with more from our panel. And we're back now with more on what attributes make a great president. Secretary Cohen, I want to ask you about this idea, the telling a president no. Time and again, people say that's a crucial thing, is getting somebody. Talk about that a little bit. Who can tell a president no?
Well, I've worked with 5 presidents during my career. 4 of those 5, I was able to meet with them and present an alternative idea. It goes back to Jimmy Carter. President Carter made a campaign pledge, for example, that he was going to pull 5,000 troops out of South Korea. I had just come back from meeting with the president of South Korea, along with Senator Nunn and Hart and John Glenn, and we met with President Carter and said, this could in fact trip a wire by you pulling those 5,000 troops out. To his credit, he listened to us and he changed. That was one example of being able to go to a president and say, Mr. President, you're making a mistake. And that's, I could give you an example with President Reagan and certainly Bill Clinton as well. And having that ability to go to President Clinton and say, Mr. President, we need more, or we need to do this, and he would be willing to listen to me.
Secretary Ridge, in the campaigns when we talk about decision making and what a president can do, it seems like they can wave a wand and things will happen. Give us a sense of how decisions get made, the pace and timing inside in the real world.
Well, I think a couple of things. One, I want to add just a quick thought to what Bill said. The moment that the president has to make a decision, he's going to get advice, yay and nay. And I recall an incident when President Bush was getting, I don't know if you were there, General, conflicting security information about a potential terrorist threat involving commercial aviation. The information was about, some thought it was a serious threat, an incredible threat. Other people didn't think it was credible. Finally, he did listen to every word. Listened to every word. He distilled it down to the least common denominator. Would any of you get on that plane? I mean, so you need an intuition and an introspection that I think is really critical in that decision-making process. The process itself, I think, is somewhat, sometimes I think it's too slow. The events of the 21st century move a lot more quickly than I think the traditional decision-making process in the White House works. Sometimes you have the assistant principals, and then the principals meet, and then you get the secretaries to meet. I mean, it could take months for decision-making for a memorandum or a recommendation of the president. One of the things I think the president in the 21st century is having to do, you have to expedite that process, because the 21st century world, I think, moves a lot more quickly than the decision-making process or the information-gathering process that is tradition within the White House.
Governor Leavitt, you worked on the transition with Mitt Romney if he were to be elected. Here, that he was a businessman, you've been a businessman. Is it possible to take those disruptive and the efficiencies of business and get them into government, where to break through some of the bureaucracy?
A willingness to make crisp decisions is an important personal attribute. On the other hand, government works differently than business. In business, you're often able to make decisions based on your own intuition, where in government, there's an old phrase, no matter how thin the pancake, there's always 2 sides. A willingness to listen to those sides and to have the discipline. I remember one day in the Oval Office, I had a meeting and I had a moment with the president, and I thought, there's another matter I want to talk to them about. I want to push my point of view. And to his credit, he said, let's let the process unfold here. I'd like to see it all at once. That's the kind of discipline that good decision making, when you have all of those decisions swirling at any given time. Yes, there are moments of emergency, but there's a lot of deliberate decision making that takes place because there's so much there and it's happening all simultaneously. There has to be an order about it, and a person willing to operate within that order and delegate to many other people parts that can be, but waiting for that essential moment when you have the information and can make the right decision.
All right, thank you, Governor. We're going to be right back. Flip some more pancakes, but for the moment, we'll take a break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. We pick up where we left off on presidential attributes with former Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge, former Defense Secretary William Cohen, former head of the NSA and CIA Mike Hayden, former Pentagon counsel Rosa Brooks, and from Salt Lake City, the former governor of Utah, Mike Leavitt. Rosa, I want to start with you. You write in your book how everything became war and the military became everything, about decision making. And presidents aren't just, they don't sometimes just get options A and options B. There's sometimes decisions that never get to them because they get stuck in the bureaucracy. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the U.S. government's executive branch is like an iceberg, and the president and the cabinet are sort of at the very top of the iceberg, but most of the government is way below, and the president never meets the people, and there's no reason he necessarily should. But you've got all this stuff going on at lower levels, but it's kind of like a giant machine to weed out nuance before it ever gets to the decision makers. So a lot of the time when the president's sitting there and he's sitting there with his cabinet, and you've all been in these situations, by that time, so much has been lost, sometimes for good reasons, because somebody realized early on that's a bad idea, let's not get that up to the president. But sometimes for the dumbest reasons, like it didn't fit in the bullet points. There was only going to be one page and it sort of didn't make it onto that page. So I think it's very, very hard if you are an inexperienced president. You don't know who to ask, you don't know who to go back to and how to say, you know what, I bet there was more stuff, I want to see that. And I think this is the point that you made, that if you don't know where the more stuff is and how to access it, you find yourself facing two choices, both of which may be dumb.
Well, you know, and sometimes, if you don't mind, sometimes in the effort to build a consensus recommendation to the president, the tendency is we all want to be in unity to give the president advice, and you need a president that says, if you can't, I'm not interested in consensus at the lowest common denominator, tell me what I need to know, and if it's a tough decision, A, B, and C, I'll make the decision.
General, when there's been some reporting recently that with CENTCOM and information on ISIS. So how does the president know what they don't know? And when they're not, when it's never getting to them, how do we, and as we're thinking about a campaign, what should we look for in the kind of management skills of a candidate that they know about their blind spots or where there might be potential blind spots?
So, as Rosa said, he's got to poke, he's got to pull, and the more experienced you are, the better equipped you are to do that. But let me give you a slightly different phenomenon, all right? And that's when the bureaucracy actually works well and goes into the president, and this happens in intelligence from time to time, it goes into the president with a conclusion about which they have great confidence that cuts across the president's personality, his policy, or his politics. Frankly, I think that happened a bit in the current administration with the growth of ISIS, kind of slowed a need there as that threat developed. I know it happened with me when we went in there in late '07 with an estimate that frankly I think still stands, that the Iranians had stopped a narrow part of their nuclear weapons program, the weaponization of the nuclear device. You could not get more unhappy information in front of President Bush and Vice President Cheney.
They didn't want to hear it.
Lord knows they challenged it. But we stood our ground. And at the end, not only did the estimate stand, but because the president had been relying on a previous estimate that had said something different and had made that public, he directed that we make this estimate, with which I think he still had some doubts. He insisted we make that public too.
So people, they've got to be able to hear news they don't want to hear. Governor Leavitt, let me ask you about hiring. When I asked President Obama about these questions of attributes, he said that you have to realize that there's a whole group of people you hire who then go and make decisions that may never get to you. How important is hiring in terms of what this next president is going to do, and that sets up their ability to perform in office?
It's a very important point. When you hire a president, you don't hire just one person. It's a team game, if you will. Nearly 4,000 people come in following a president, and they make a lot of decisions. But in the final analysis, when all of that boils up, I was in the Oval Office one day, and President Bush said, look, they call this the Oval Office because there are no corners to hide in. Ultimately, the decision had to be his, and I think that was the point. All of this rolls up to the point that many of the decisions are able to be made by others, but in the final analysis, the President of the United States sets the tone, not just whether they will listen to information that's hostile to their original point of view, but whether those who actually come in that team of 4,000 will.
I think that's absolutely right, if I can jump in on that for a second. I remember feeling early on in this administration, when I was at the Pentagon, tremendous frustration on some issues where I felt like President Obama, if only he knew he would make the right decision. He has these staff gatekeepers who aren't letting these important issues get to him. And I realized after a certain point, he's got these people there because he wants them there. You know, that ultimately presidents choose the staff they want, and they choose the staff who will enable them or not enable them to be in a bubble.
Right.
So good leaders attract good people, empower them to do whatever they do within that leader's vision. And the nature of government is so large, you really do have to rely upon them. That's just the way it is.
Secretary Cohen, you were in the Senate for 18 years, you know about politics and communicating. What role does that play in terms of the importance of presidential communication? Let's talk about it externally, and then maybe somebody else can weigh in terms of internal communication.
Okay, well, let me emphasize what Tom Ridge talked about earlier, that what you want in a president is someone who has empathy, compassion, understanding for the problems of the average person. In this country, we have a deep racial divide. You can only look at what's taking place in Ferguson, Missouri, in Chicago, in Baltimore, in terms of the divide between the black community and the police community that serves them. There are rebellions taking place, and I recall when President Bush 41 was traveling out to California in the wake of the Rodney King beatings and the rebellion that was taking place out there, he asked me, how should I address this? How would you recommend? And so he was, President of the United States, asking me how to approach this subject. And language becomes important. I think when it comes to Donald Trump, he uses language to divide, to demean, and ultimately to divert. He's diverting attention from the big issues. And it forces you and the media to be chasing everything down a rabbit hole. What did he mean? Was it sarcastic? Was it sincere? Was it Delphically ambiguous? How do we find out? And we go around. Meanwhile, you've got issues with Turkey and Russia. You've got issues in terms of what the Russians are doing in Syria. You've got a bigger issue going in terms of how are you going to handle. How would you ever recommend giving nuclear weapons or providing them to Japan and South Korea? These are the big issues, and yet we're talking about his latest comment about what he would do under these circumstances, or we're cheating in Philadelphia or elsewhere.
Let me ask Secretary Ridge, based on your time, also you spent time in the House. Donald Trump also is a negotiator, deal maker. He's had some considerable success just getting to yes. Who knows how he gets there? He has a talent for getting to yes. Isn't that something Washington needs pretty badly?
Well, I think there's a difference between deal maker and being a consensus builder. From sometimes when I listen to some people, it reminds me of a I think it was in the 10 Commandments, Yul Brynner turned to one of his aides and said, let it be written, let it be done. I think one of the presidential qualities we need somebody that is a practitioner who understands the constitutional process, that is willing to engage the House and the Senate. From time to time, I worry about a government that becomes very ideological. Leaders become ideological, so it's either my way or the highway. The everyman, the men and women that make America work. They're looking for leadership that understands the complexity of their world, the challenges they face, and is willing to bring people together to build consensus. Ronald Reagan was great at that. He and Tip, divergence point of view, they did it. President Bush 41 told me last year in the 25th anniversary of the AD, one of his proudest moments was signing the Americans with Disabilities Act because he brought Republicans and Democrats together. Everything we do big in this country has normally been around a consensus of both parties, and I think that's what Americans are looking for. Leadership who is aspirational, that builds a consensus around solving big problems and not just talking about them.
Governor Leavitt, Secretary Ridge has made the case for the old, bringing people together, but there's a feeling in the land that just doesn't cut it anymore, and that somebody does need to come in who might not have the niceties of the establishment, but can break through and get some things done with a different skill set. What's wrong with that argument?
The skill set of the 21st century requires collaborative leadership, and that means the ability to bring people together and find their common purpose. There are times when you simply have to step forward and show the direction, but in a democracy like ours, what's been missing is that Washington has become all about preparing for the next election and controlling the news cycle, because you're sure if you had complete control, you would do the right thing, these other people won't. Well, the reality is that's true for both, and a president who can bring people together to find that common solution is what's been missing, and I think what people yearn for. There is a culture of divide that's really born in our politics. It used to be that winning an election, you keep your base and erode the middle enough that you could win. Now we have enough apathy in the middle that people get elected by lighting up their base, and enough that they can have the votes required. That's a change in the American politic, but it does require a new kind of leader, I think, for the 21st century.
All right, we're going to have to end it there. Thanks to all of you for helping us sort through a little bit about what a president does so we can make better choices. We'll be right back to talk about the highs and lows of the week in this week and what's happening next week. Stay with us.